The modern Eastern Front has been raging for over 3 years now. Yet, thanks to the internet and a number of bad actors, this war has become saturated with disinformation, propaganda, lies, and manipulation, to the point where an ordinary person can no longer tell what's true, what's false, or what's actually happening on the front lines. After more than 1,300 days of war, you might be asking yourself, who is actually winning? Short answer, no one. Long answer, it's a bit more complicated. First, we have to understand what winning a war actually means or is like or is defined by. I will try to keep it short. Number 1, total military victory, clear capitulation. One side defeats the other completely. The losing side surrenders, their government may fall, and the victors impose terms. For example, Second World War. Clear winners were the Allied forces and clear losers were the Axis powers. Number 2, strategic withdrawal, asymmetric victory. A stronger side pulls out due to high cost, low morale, or political pressure. Despite winning battles on paper, they lose strategically or politically. An example here would be the Vietnam War. The US had overwhelming military power, but couldn't break Vietnamese resistance. Domestic protests, guerrilla tactics, and political strain led to US withdrawal. So basically, North Vietnam won, reunified the country, and the US technically lost, despite battlefield superiority. Number 3, stalemate, or Pyrrhic victory. No one achieves their goals, or one side wins, but suffers such massive losses that the victory feels hollow. In this case, it is the First World War. The Allies won, but at an unimaginable cost, over 16 million dead. Europe was shattered. Empires collapsed. So basically, victory came at a massive cost. And the last common war ending is ongoing conflict, frozen war, neither side wins or loses decisively. The war drags on or settles into a frozen state. For example, the Korean War ended in an armistice, not a peace treaty. Korea remains divided to this day. Basically, they are technically still at war, but not really. Now, to get a better understanding, we will have to compare the war endings I talked about with the modern Eastern Front. As you might have noticed, the stalemate or frozen conflict model fits the Russo-Ukrainian War the best. A total military victory by either side seems highly unlikely at this stage, and a tactical withdrawal is almost impossible, especially considering that Russia has already begun integrating territories into its administrative and cultural systems. So instead of focusing solely on front lines or territory, we need to look at the broader factors that define winning or losing in this kind of modern war. These include military shifts, changes in armed forces, strength, technology, and strategic capability on both sides, demographic and economic impact, the long-term consequences for each country's population and economy, cost of the war, not just financially, but in terms of equipment, infrastructure, and most importantly, human lives. Global influence and alliances. How this war affects the international standing of Russia and Ukraine, and which countries are aligning themselves with each side. Internal stability, social cohesion, political control, and public morale within each country as the war drags on. We begin with the military changes. Ukraine has lost thousands of troops and is struggling with manpower shortages, making future offensives harder. Russia has lost huge amounts of equipment. Tanks, vehicles, fighter jets, bomber, and even their navy suffered significant losses. But thanks to its massive military industry, it can replace more gear in 2-3 months than NATO can in a year. That gives Russia a long-term advantage in supply and production. Then, the demographics and economy. Ukraine's population has dropped by millions, refugees and casualties, risking long-term labor shortages and economic strain. However, it continues to receive strong international financial aid and support for rebuilding. Russia faces a declining population, brain drain, and growing reliance on internal labor and less developed trade partners. But it has weathered sanctions better than expected, shifting towards a wartime economy. And a very important aspect, cost of the war. Both sides have suffered heavy casualties, likely over 100,000 killed or wounded each, and are pouring billions into the war believing for a total victory. Ukraine relies on Western support, which keeps its military and economy afloat. Russia spends massively, but benefits from continued energy exports and a centralized economy that can prioritize war production. Another one would be the global position. Ukraine has gained global sympathy, closer ties to NATO, EU, and Western democracies, and increased its international visibility. Russia has lost standing in the West, but gained closer ties with China, Iran, and parts of the global South, creating new geopolitical alliances. And the last, internal stability. The Ukraine has maintained strong national unity despite wartime fatigue and political stress. Russia has managed to maintain control at home, though dissent is suppressed and long-term public patience is uncertain. So, in conclusion, Ukraine shows resilience, global backing, and national unity, but suffers from limited resources and high costs. Russia has size, production, and strategic patience, but at the cost of isolation and growing internal pressure. Now, taking a look at the map, you might think Russia is winning. It controls large parts of eastern and southern Ukraine, and it's holding them for now. But at what cost? Tens of thousands dead, a damaged economy, global isolation, huge losses in machinery, a drawn-out war with no clear end in sight. And Ukraine? It hasn't collapsed. It's still standing, still fighting with the support of much of the Western world. But it's also paying an enormous price in lives, infrastructure, and long-term stability. So, who's actually winning? You might think it's Russia, logically, especially long-term. But Ukraine is holding strong against a military maybe even 50 times bigger and stronger than theirs. But in reality, no one, not really. Not when both sides are bleeding, not when cities are destroyed, families broken, futures uncertain, not when the only thing growing is the list of the dead. In the end, maybe the real answer is, in modern war, winning is just a slower form of losing. But you clicked in the video for an answer, and the answer is Russia. But at what cost? An army 50 times smaller, weaker, and less experienced, taking a world power out of another. Would you consider that winning if you beat your neighbor in a fight, but your own house burned down while you were at it? Sure, maybe you stood your ground. Maybe you proved your strength. But now you're standing in the ashes, wondering if it was ever worth it.